The golf club incident was not the only occasion when William found himself in the middle of a marital game of one-upmanship. And it was no coincidence that the public were firmly of the view that Diana was a model mother and Charles a cold and absent father, out of touch with the modern world. When the boys were with their mother, they were photographed having fun, hurtling down water chutes at funfairs, laughing and looking like ordinary little boys. When their father was in the picture, they were more likely to be looking immaculate in suits and ties at family gatherings, with the Queen and Queen Mother, attending church services or the traditional New Year pheasant shoots. Diana was also seen as the one introducing the boys to the thrill of skiing, knowing when she booked the holiday and alerted the press that Charles would be otherwise engaged. Both Charles and Diana were avid skiers and he had promised the boys he would take them. He was looking forward to watching them put on their skis for the first time and discover the excitement of the mountains. But there was a disagreement about where to take them. Charles wanted them all to go to Klosters in Switzerland. It was his favorite resort, but it had been the scene of a tragic accident 3 years earlier when his friend Major Hugh Lindsay was killed by an avalanche that narrowly missed the prince and badly injured Paddy Palmer Tompkinson. Diana, understandably, didn't want to go back to a place filled with such terrible memories. Without resolving the impasse, she quietly booked a holiday for herself and the boys, with a few other friends, in the pretty Austrian resort of Lech during William's half-term in March 1991. The dates clashed with a large shooting party Charles had arranged at Sandringham and he couldn't let down his friends at short notice. This was not the only time she made plans for the children or changed pre-existing plans. As Patrick Jeffson, her private secretary at the time, wrote in his memoir, Shadows of a Princess, William and Harry's theoretical potential as pawns in the Wales's game of rivalry was loudly decried on all sides, but it did not stop it happening. The prince was perhaps slow to recognize the value of being seen to be introducing the boys onto the public stage, or, more likely, he jealously guarded their privacy. His wife, on the other hand, suffered few such inhibitions. William's first official public appearance was a prime example. There had been no discussion in advance and no agreement that William would be taken out of school on St. David's Day, the 1st of March 1991, and flown to Cardiff, the capital city of Wales, to attend a service in Llandaff Cathedral. Indeed, the agreement between them was that the children would not be made to undertake public engagements until they were older. But without telling anyone in the prince's office, Diana quietly organized it. It would have been a political and public relations disaster for the Prince of Wales's eldest son, and in all probability, the future Prince of Wales, to make his first visit to the principality without his father, yet it was by sheer chance that his private secretary discovered the princess's arrangement. Luckily he was able to reschedule the prince's day so that it looked like a family outing. A far greater disaster was looming, which was to upset William more than anything so far and was the beginning of a series of acutely difficult years. During the summer of 1991, when he turned 9, Diana embarked on her life story. Speaking into a tape recorder at Kensington Palace, which found its way, via an intermediary, to the journalist Andrew Morton, she described her marriage. After 10 years she wanted the world to know just how unhappy she was, and she wanted the world to know why. The result was an explosive book which took the prince and his staff completely by surprise and was as damaging to him, the Queen and the institution of monarchy, as it was hurtful and humiliating. In the weeks before publication in June 1992, Diana, her true story was serialized in the Sunday Times. The first installment appeared under the headline, Diana driven to 5 suicide bids by uncaring Charles. It went on to talk about her bulimia, her husband's indifference towards her, his obsession with his mistress, his shortcomings as a father, and the loneliness and isolation she had felt for so many years, trapped in a loveless marriage within a hostile court and a cold and disapproving royal family. The book had a compelling authority and many of the princess's closest friends and family members were openly quoted and thanked in the acknowledgements. For example, James Gilby explains, "She thinks he is a bad father, a selfish father. The children have to tie in with what he's doing. He will never delay, cancel or change anything which he has sorted out for their benefit. It's a reflection of the way he was brought up, and it is history repeating itself. That's why she gets so sad when he is photographed riding with the children at Sandringham. When I spoke to her about it, she was literally having to contain her anger because she thought the picture would represent the fact that he was a good father, whereas she has the real story. Diana's response was to visit Caroline Bartholomew, one of the most quoted sources in the book, after first ensuring the press cameras would be there, and put on a very public display of affection for her old flatmate. Robert Fellows immediately offered his resignation, but the Queen refused it. Several people already suspected Diana was the principal source. Patrick Jephson, for one, had been puzzled by a conversation just before publication when she had asked him whether the charity Turning Point might be able to cope with a sudden donation of some tens of thousands of pounds, her share of the spoils, but he didn't know for sure, and his loyalty was to his boss. Also, some obviously well-sourced stories had been appearing in the Sunday Times, such as the dismissal of Sir Christopher Airey as private secretary to the Prince of Wales. Airey had been selected to take over from Sir John Riddell in 1990 but had not been a success. His end came at Highgrove one afternoon when Diana was at the house, and she was one of a handful of people who could have known what happened. When the story ran, the Prince's office was a very unhappy place, with no one knowing who they could trust as various leaked stories appeared in other newspapers. What puzzled them most was that much of the book was accurate in many respects. There were stories that only Diana and very few others could have known about, and memos leaked that nobody else could have seen. But most of the stories had a spin, which made them not quite as anyone else present remembered. For example, there was a memo which, according to Morton, Richard Aylard, who took over as private secretary when Airey left, had written to the Prince of Wales following the public condemnation of his behaviour when William cracked his skull, encouraging him to be seen in public more frequently with his children. At the conclusion of his missive, said Morton, he, Aylard, heavily underlined in red ink and printed in bold capitals a single word, try. What really happened was that the Prince had sent Aylard a memo saying William and Harry wanted to do a few things with their father, and could Aylard please look in the diary and pick out a few engagements that would be suitable for the boys. Aylard wrote back with 3 or 4 suggestions, including a trip to a naval ship, and said that the next step was to speak to the princess to make sure she was happy with the plans. It would be best, wrote Aylard, if the prince could speak to her about it himself. Failing that, he would speak to Patrick Jephson. Charles sent the memo back, annotated in red pen, and he was the only person in the office allowed to use red ink. Against the suggestion that he should speak to his wife, he wrote, I will try. Charles kept a dignified silence, even when he knew for certain that Diana had been involved in the book. He didn't attempt to defend himself or correct the facts. Despite all the years of provocation, he has never publicly criticized Diana. His friends were itching to weigh in on his behalf, but he was adamant he wanted none of them to get involved. Some did as he asked, others couldn't bear the sense of injustice. The War of the Waleses was underway and the newspapers delighted in it as their circulations rose, particularly those Diana was personally briefing. She was a master tactician, oblivious, or so it seemed, to the effect it had on her children, particularly on William, who was old enough to take in what was going on. There was only so much the Barbers could shield William and Harry from, but the boys at Ludgrove did what they do best when their friends were in trouble. They formed a loyal and protective ring around them and kept their minds on other things.